They said it like a favor. We think it's time, Margaret. Time to rest. Rest. After 41 years, they offered me rest like a mercy, like a child being told her toy's been taken for repair. No thank you speech, no cake, just a beige envelope and a smile that didn't reach the eyes. I sat across from the new director, 32 maybe, watching him avoid eye contact as he explained how the system was evolving and how fresh energy was important in community spaces. My badge lay on the desk between us. Margaret Harper, head librarian. The brass was worn smooth from years of use. I didn't touch it. By the time I stepped out of the staff room, the usual hum of the library felt distant, like I was watching it through a pane of glass. Megan from the children's section passed by and smiled awkwardly, clutching a stack of flyers. No one else looked up. I was invisible already. My keys were in my pocket. Not that anyone asked me to return them. I left them anyway, quietly placing them in the return bin on my way out. The automatic doors slid open like a slow exhale, and I stepped into the pale November light. The bus stop was empty. I didn't sit, didn't cry either, just stood still, waiting for the world to notice I'd left. I walked home the long way, past the post office, the bakery, the little florist's shop that hadn't changed in 20 years. I didn't want to arrive yet. I needed the in-between, the quiet of sidewalks and leafless trees, the chill that kept me sharp. At the corner of Ridge and Lambert, a boy no older than 7 slipped and fell on the frosted pavement. His mother scolded him softly, fussed over his mittens. He brushed her off, red-cheeked with shame. I watched them go, thinking how quickly the world expects men to hide pain. By the time I reached my house, my legs were trembling. I paused at the gate. It had leaned for years. George used to say he'd fix it, but he never did. After his heart gave out, I left it crooked. Something about that imperfection made it feel like home. Inside, the silence pressed against me like damp wool. The hallway smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. I shrugged off my coat and hung it where it always went. 41 years of habit don't vanish with a handshake. The answering machine blinked red. One message. I pressed play. "Hey, Mum, just checking in. Marcy and I are taking the kids skiing this weekend. Might swing by next week, depending how things go. Love you." It was my son's voice, detached and hurried. No mention of my retirement. I hadn't told him yet. Didn't want to hear the practiced sympathy, the performative concern. He'd stopped listening years ago anyway. I made tea, the way I always did when I felt untethered. Black, with 1 sugar, poured into the chipped mug with the faded lilac print. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam until it disappeared. What do you do the day after you stop being needed? The library had been more than work. It had been rhythm, identity. I knew the names of every regular, the preferences of every reader. I could recite Dewey Decimals in my sleep. Children had grown into parents on my watch. Some still sent me Christmas cards. And now? A thin white envelope sat on the kitchen counter, my last paycheck, printed and folded like an afterthought. The numbers didn't matter. I had enough. George had been careful, and I had never lived extravagantly. But money wasn't the point. It was the erasure, the quiet dismissal, the suggestion that my time had passed. I carried the mug to the window and looked out at the backyard. The bird feeder was nearly empty. I'd refill it tomorrow. Maybe. In the drawer beside the stove, under old receipts and spare keys, lay a notebook, spiral-bound. I pulled it out and flipped past pages of grocery lists, reminders, addresses. Near the back were notes I'd written after George died. Not poems, not quite. Fragments. thoughts I hadn't known where else to put. The worst kind of loneliness is the kind people insist is freedom. I closed the notebook. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. At the threshold stood an elderly man in a brown cap, holding a small brown box. "Delivery for Margaret Harper?" he asked, squinting at his clipboard. "I'm Margaret," I said. He handed over the box. "Retirement flowers," he muttered. "Congratulations or something." I signed the slip and shut the door. Inside was a modest bouquet of yellow daisies and a printed card. "Thanks for your service. The City of Ashton Public Libraries." No name. No signature. I placed the flowers on the windowsill. They looked wrong there. Too bright. Too fake. I turned away. Later that night, I opened the drawer in the study where I kept old letters and important documents, birth certificates, the deed to the house, George's will, and behind them, a thick envelope labelled simply "Pension Options." I'd meant to go over it months ago. The library had offered a consultation with a financial planner. I'd declined. Now I studied the numbers. I could live comfortably for another 20 years. Maybe more. The question was, how? I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, listening to the old house breathe. Somewhere outside, a fox screamed. Or maybe it was just the wind. Either way, the sound pierced the night with something wild, something unbroken. The next morning I made oatmeal out of habit, then pushed it aside untouched. My appetite, like my purpose, had vanished. I wandered the house in slow circles. Living room, hallway, kitchen, then back again, half expecting a list to present itself, a task to announce its urgency. It didn't. At 10:30, I sat at the desk in George's old study. The sun fell across the floor in a neat rectangle. Dust floated through it like suspended ash. I opened the pension folder again, not to read it, just to touch it. Proof that I was still here, that something was still mine. Then I opened the middle drawer. The ledger was there. Green cover, soft from years of use. My grandmother's, then mine. It held every significant expense of our marriage. Mortgage, groceries, car repairs, school fees, even the monthly donations to the Veterans Book Drive. The last entry was from 2 months ago. Donation to Literacy Fund, 75 woolwalds. I stared at the handwriting. Steady, rounded, a hand that still believed in systems, in reciprocation. I thought about that small check, how much joy I'd felt sending it, how much it meant to believe I could still be useful. I closed the ledger. On the bookshelf, wedged behind atlases and outdated encyclopedias, was a thin blue folder marked Ideas in block letters, another relic from George's time. I opened it. Inside, scraps of plans, diagrams for a composting system, sketches of a backyard greenhouse, clippings about intergenerational literacy hubs. His writing was messier than mine, but hopeful. One page caught my eye, lined paper, folded into quarters. At the top, he'd written, "If we had the building, what would we do with it?" Below were bullet points, each in his neat, optimistic hand. Shared reading room, free tutoring for seniors learning tech, community nights with films and pie, library exchange corner. No one turned away. I stared at the list, my heart knocking softly against my ribs. George had always dreamed bigger than I did. I'd been the one keeping us grounded, doing payroll, double-checking permits. But this wasn't fantasy. Not really. I got up slowly, pulled on my coat, and grabbed the notebook I kept in my purse. I didn't know where I was going yet, only that I needed to be moving. Outside, the cold slapped my cheeks awake. I walked past the church, the playground, the new yoga studio that used to be a laundromat. At the far end of Main Street stood a small brick building with a crooked sign, Ashford Reading Room, closed until further notice. It had been shut down for months. Mould in the walls, the paper had said. Budget cuts. Declining interest. But the building still stood. I crossed the street and peered in through the dusty glass. Shelves still lined the walls. The circulation desk was intact. Chairs stacked in a corner like forgotten guests. I stood there for a long time, notebook pressed against my chest, before walking to the town office. Inside, a young woman looked up from her screen. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to inquire about the reading room on Main Street," I said. "Ah, the old Ashford branch." She typed something. "It's city property now, available for lease or purchase. Are you with an organization?" "No," I said slowly. "Just me." She blinked. "Well, there are forms. It's a long process." I nodded. "Then we'd better start today." The form was 12 pages long. By page 2, my fingers began to ache. By page 5, I'd taken off my coat and was leaning over the counter, squinting at fine print. The young woman offered me coffee around page 7. I declined, not out of pride, but because I didn't trust my hand to hold the cup steady. She watched me fill in the section marked Nature of Use with barely concealed curiosity. "Are you really planning to open it again?" she asked finally. "The reading room?" I didn't look up. "That depends on whether the city thinks I'm too old to matter." She went quiet after that. By the time I signed the last page, my back ached and my throat felt dry, but I felt something else too. A small, quiet steadiness. Like placing one brick on another and realizing you still remember how to build. She gave me a copy of the documents and promised someone would be in touch within 2 weeks. I walked out into the cold with the folder pressed to my chest. At the corner, I hesitated. I hadn't planned this far ahead. I turned left toward the bank. Richard Crane, my financial advisor, had been managing my accounts since George passed. He wore small glasses and navy blue suits and spoke with the kind of practiced calm that made people want to trust him. "Mrs. Harper." He greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "To what do we owe the honor?" I sat down, placing the city documents on his desk. "I want to separate funds into a new account. Personal use. Short term, but independent." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning a trip?" "No, a project." He glanced at the papers. "Community property." "Yes." He adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Harper, this would reduce the monthly yield from your primary investments. At your age, it's—" "I'm aware of my age," I interrupted. "Please don't repeat it to me." He looked properly chastised. "Of course." We went over the numbers. I wasn't reckless. I knew exactly what I could afford. I'd lived modestly, never needed luxury, only security. The projected budget for 6 months was realistic. By the time I left, the new account was open. That evening, I made lentil soup and left the radio on for company. The house felt less oppressive. Not cheerful, but lighter, like something inside had shifted position. I made a list in my notebook. Contact plumber, ask about city inspections, estimate cost of tables and shelves, reach out to Ruth from the co-op, visit hardware store. The list was long, exhausting. It filled an entire page. But when I read it through, I felt alive. The next morning I called Ruth. She answered on the second ring. "Margaret Harper. Well, I'll be. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I explained everything. The reading room, the plan, my intent to open it again, not just as a library, but as a space for seniors, for community, for those like us who'd been quietly shuffled aside. Ruth went silent for a moment. Then, "You know, I've still got that old projector from the co-op movie nights, and I know at least 3 retired teachers who've been bored out of their minds. I smiled. Would they volunteer? They'd pay you for the chance to feel useful again. Later that week, I visited the old reading room again. I stood in the doorway with the keys the city had couriered over. The lock stuck. I jiggled it once, twice, and the door creaked open. Inside, the air was musty, but it smelled like possibility. I stepped across the threshold into the dust and silence and said, aloud, "Well, George, let's see if we remember how to do this." The first thing that had to go was the carpet. It reeked of mold and memory, and not the good kind. I called in a favour from Ruth's cousin Harold, who used to do flooring before his knees gave out. He showed up in a patched windbreaker and work boots older than my kitchen stove. "Place smells like old ambition," he muttered, prying up a corner of the carpet. "That's not an insult." "I'll take it as a compliment," I said, holding the trash bag open. For the next 3 days, we worked in shifts. Harold couldn't bend for long, and I couldn't lift much. But between the two of us, we made steady progress. The carpet came up in clumps, exposing wooden floorboards worn but salvageable. Dust filled the air in thick, glittering clouds. We opened windows and let the cold air bite through. By Friday, the floors were bare, and the dump had taken 4 bags off our hands. "You sure about this?" Harold asked, sipping lukewarm coffee from his thermos. I looked around. The empty shelves, the sagging ceiling tile, the faded mural of children reading under a tree. "Yes," I said. "I'm not interested in going gently." He grinned. "Didn't think you were." I spent the weekend at the hardware store, collecting paint samples and bargaining over light fixtures. The clerk, a teenage boy with a soft jaw and earbuds glued to his ears, seemed confused when I pulled out a notepad and started asking about dimmable LEDs. "Are you renovating a place?" he asked, looking me over. "No," I said. "I'm restoring one." By the next Wednesday, the space smelled less like mildew and more like determination. The city inspector came by, clipboard in hand. Young, meticulous, clearly trying to hide how surprised he was. "You're doing this yourself?" "I am." He made a note. "Looks like you know what you're doing." "Don't sound so shocked." He smiled faintly and stamped the inspection form. That night, I collapsed into my armchair with a heating pad and a mug of chamomile. My muscles ached in unfamiliar places, but there was a strange pleasure in the pain, a kind of proof. My body might be slower, but it hadn't forgotten how to try. The phone rang around 8. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear another breathless apology from my son. I didn't want to hear nothing either. Silence and absence had begun to feel the same. Instead, I opened the notebook again. At the top of a new page, I wrote, "This space will not beg to be relevant." Then beneath it, quiet chairs, honest coffee, stories without expiration dates. A place where no one says, "You've had your time." On Friday morning, Ruth arrived with 2 women I hadn't seen in years. Eleanor used to teach Latin. Joyce had worked the reference desk at the main branch downtown before they phased her out with automation. "We brought muffins," Joyce said, already eyeing the paint trays. "I didn't know we were going to work," Eleanor added, "but I'm not leaving." We painted until our arms gave out. Mostly off-white, with warm grey trim. Ruth put music on her phone, something soft, wordless. And time passed without wait. It wasn't just a library anymore. It was becoming something else, something ours. It happened on a Tuesday, crisp and harmless. We were sorting through donated books, boxes left at the door from old-school libraries, retired teachers, even a local church, when we heard the shouting. Put that back! Someone barked. Then a thud. Then silence. Ruth froze mid-stack. I set my clipboard down and followed the noise to the back hallway where the small side entrance faced the alley. The door was ajar. Outside, two young delivery men stood awkwardly near a woman in a beige coat, her cane clutched tight in one hand, her eyes brimming with tears. A third man, bigger, wearing a city maintenance badge, stood over a tipped cart. Books spilled across the pavement like shame. "I told you to leave it," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm not done reading yet." "It's scheduled, Mom. I don't make the rules." I stepped forward. "What's going on?" They all turned. The man straightened up. "This isn't your business." "I'm making it mine." He glanced at my clothes. Old paint-flecked sweater, librarian's shoes. He looked unimpressed. "She's behind on her storage unit. We're repossessing the contents." I looked at the woman. She couldn't have been younger than 80. Her gloves were worn through at the fingertips. "Those are my books," she said. "They were mine before the storage, and they're mine now." I stepped beside her. "If she moves them today, does it stop the repossession?" The man shrugged. "Technically, yeah. But where's she going to take 'em?" "To me," I said. "Bring the cart inside." He hesitated, looking between us, then muttered something under his breath and wheeled the load toward the side door. Books rattled with every bump. I held the door open. Her name was Evelyn. She'd been an English teacher for 39 years, retired at 72, priced out of her rental a year later. Most of her belongings had been sold, donated, or packed into 2 storage units. One had already been lost. "I tried," she said, sitting at the table with a trembling cup of tea. "Tried to keep the important things, but it all starts to look important when you're alone." Her books were everything from Austen to Atwood, with well-thumbed dictionaries and old exam prep guides in between. Pages were soft at the edges, spines reinforced with tape and love. "They said I should throw them out," she whispered. "That no one wants books anymore." "We want them," I said. "And we want you." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Evelyn's face hovering behind my eyes. Not the panic. That would fade. But the way she'd looked after. When we gave her a shelf. When she saw her name written under collection curator. That was the moment. Not the saving. The restoring. The next day, I wrote a sign and hung it by the door. "This place doesn't ask who you used to be. It welcomes who you still are." Within the week, we had 3 more visitors like Evelyn. One brought board games. Another, an old typewriter he insisted someone might want to feel the rhythm of. A third came just to sit, to drink coffee and not be watched. The city hadn't published anything yet. No news story, no spotlight. But people knew. They always know where kindness lives. It was Ruth who brought it up first. "You know," she said, wiping her hands on her apron after restocking the tea shelf, "we could host something. A gathering." I raised an eyebrow. "This whole place is a gathering." She grinned. "I mean something with chairs in rows and music that isn't leaking from someone's earbuds. Something to mark the reopening." "We're not really open yet," I reminded her. "You think they care?" She nodded toward the hallway where Eleanor was helping a new visitor find her reading glasses. "Feels open to me." The idea grew quietly, like moss, soft but persistent. By the end of the week, the others had weighed in. Joyce could bring her nephew's jazz trio. Eleanor knew someone who still printed flyers by hand. Harold had an old podium in his garage, for some damn reason. So we planned it. A quiet Sunday afternoon, No speeches, no ribbon cutting, just coffee and cookies, and something that felt like proof. The day before the event, I swept the entire floor twice. I rearranged the chairs, then undid it, convinced it looked too much like a waiting room. I checked the light bulbs, the tea bags, the guest book. I scrubbed the windows until my arms throbbed. When I finally sat down, Ruth placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" "I don't know," I said. "Well, if you're not, pretend you are. That's what the rest of us are doing." The turnout was modest, maybe 40 people, but every face glowed with something familiar: recognition, relief, a kind of surprised joy, like bumping into a friend you didn't know you missed. The jazz trio played soft instrumentals. Joyce made her shortbread. One man, a retired firefighter, stood near the back, clutching a book of poetry like it might vanish. I didn't make a speech, but people came to me anyway, one by one, with hands outstretched. "I thought we'd been forgotten," said a woman in a dark purple shawl. "Not anymore," I replied. At the end of the night, someone had left a folded note in the comment box. I opened it later, alone, with tea in hand. "Thank you for building a place where I don't feel like a leftover." That night, I walked through the building alone, barefoot, the soft thud of my steps like heartbeats in the silence. The walls weren't perfect. The ceiling still needed patching. The lights flickered if you used the microwave at the same time. But the space was full, not with noise, with presence. And presence is harder to build than any shelf. On Monday, the city finally called. A man with a clipped voice introduced himself as someone from upstairs, said he'd heard about the gathering, asked if we were complying with occupancy codes, insurance standards, tax documentation. "Everything's in process?" I said. There was a pause. "You're not charging anyone, correct?" "No," I said. "Not yet." Another pause. "Well, just be careful. We don't want complications." I thanked him and hung up. Later that afternoon, I found Evelyn shelving a new donation of paperbacks. She looked up, smiling. "Did you hear? They're talking about us at the senior center." "Oh?" One woman said it was like a speakeasy, but for the polite. I laughed. "I'll take it." Evelyn reached for a book, then paused. "You know, I used to believe respect was something you either got or didn't, like luck. But I think I was wrong." I tilted my head. "Go on." She met my gaze. "I think you have to carve out a space for it, make it real, and then let people walk into it." I stood there for a moment after she left, one hand resting on the edge of the bookshelf. A place for respect. Not demanded, lived. The letter came on a Thursday. Thick envelope, formal heading, city seal embossed on the flap. I opened it with the care of someone disarming a mine. Inside, an official notice requesting clarification on our operating structure, proof of liability coverage, and confirmation of non-commercial intent. The language was polite, but the message was clear. We'd been noticed. I sat with it for a while, fingers pressed to the paper. Not afraid, exactly. Just aware. Aware of how quickly systems move to contain what they don't understand. By noon, I was at Richard Crane's office. He blinked when I laid the letter on his desk. "You've certainly stirred something. I need your help." He nodded, flipping through the pages. "This isn't a shutdown. Yet. But you'll need documentation, proper entity status, an umbrella to operate under. Non-profit, most likely. And quick." His mouth tightened. Quick and legal don't always walk together. I looked him in the eye. "Then we jog." The paperwork took hours, legal language that looped back on itself, Forms for state registration, federal EIN, mission statements, bylaws. I signed until my hand cramped. By the time I left, we had a name. The Quiet House. It came to me while writing the mission. To create a space where silence isn't loneliness, where stories don't expire, and where aging is not an exit, but a passage. I told the others the next morning. We stood in a loose circle between the bookshelves and folding chairs, coffee cups in hand. "They're asking questions," I said. "Which means we're real. And if we're real, we need roots." Ruth nodded first, then Harold, then everyone. "You want us to call it the Quiet House?" Joyce asked, amused. "It's better than Community Initiative for Elder Literary Engagement." Eleanor laughed so hard she snorted. The weeks that followed blurred. Richard filed the articles. Ruth set up the website. Joyce's niece helped design a simple logo, a stylized open book with a roof above it. We started keeping sign-in sheets, tracking donations, logging events. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding, like laying stones in a riverbed. Then, in the middle of February, a woman showed up wearing a city badge and a skeptical frown. She walked through with a clipboard, snapping photos, asking about exits, occupancy, heating permits. At the end, she said, "I'll be filing a preliminary report." I said, "Would you like a cup of tea before you go?" She blinked, then nodded. We sat at the long table. I poured her a cup and passed the sugar. "It's very quiet here," she said, sipping. "It's meant to be." She looked around. "You know, my mother used to run a bridge group at the YMCA. They shut it down last year. Said it didn't align with youth engagement goals." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She looked back at me. "I'll file the report, but off the record. It's good, what you're doing." That night, I stayed late. I walked the shelves, brushing my fingers along their spines. Then I stood in the middle of the room and whispered, "You're not going anywhere." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The letter came a week later, folded too neatly to be friendly. This time it wasn't from the city. It was from someone with a logo, an office, and a title long enough to cover half a business card. Regional Director of Strategic Community Partnerships, Ashton Public Libraries. It began with, "We commend your efforts," which always means trouble. Then, "However, it has come to our attention that the Quiet House may be offering services that overlap with those historically provided by the Ashton Public Library system." I stopped reading. Overlap. That was their word for it. Never mind that they'd gutted programs, slashed hours, replaced librarians with self-checkout kiosks, and volunteers who didn't know a Dewey Decimal from a door hinge. Now that someone else was filling in the cracks, they were concerned about jurisdiction. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it on the counter like spoiled milk. That afternoon, we were hosting a poetry hour. Nothing formal. Just people reading aloud, sharing old favourites or scribbled verses. Evelyn read a piece she'd written in her 20s. Joyce recited Dickinson. Reed, Ruth's grandson, home from college, read something modern and jagged, his voice shy but steady. I didn't read. I just listened. After, I stood near the windows, watching the soft bustle of people gathering their coats, exchanging numbers, making plans. A woman I didn't know lingered by the door. Grey coat, wide eyes. She looked like she hadn't spoken aloud in some time. She approached slowly. Are you the one who started this?" "I suppose I am," I said. She pressed her lips together. "Thank you." That's all. Just that. But she said it like it meant something. I didn't show the letter to the others. Not yet. Instead, I called the number listed at the bottom. A woman answered. Smooth voice, practiced tone. This is Director Elaine McIntyre's office. This is Margaret Harper, founder of the Quiet House. I received a letter. I'd like to speak directly with Director McIntyre. A pause. May I ask the nature of the call? Yes. I'd like to know what exactly she's worried I might take from her. 3 days later, the meeting was set. Tuesday, 10 a.m., downtown office, second floor, glass door with silver lettering. Elaine McIntyre was younger than I expected, polished, alert, with a smile trained to appear empathetic without actually giving anything away. She gestured to the chair across from her. Mrs. Harper, thank you for coming. Ms., I corrected, sitting down. Mrs. went with my husband. Her smile didn't falter. Of course. She launched into her pitch, careful language about mission alignment, resource distribution, and mutual benefit. There was an offer, buried beneath the formalities. If we agreed to affiliate, the library system could provide materials, some funding, maybe even feature us in their quarterly newsletter. In return, we'd come under their umbrella. Oversight, control, branding. I let her finish, then said, Do you know what a quiet house used to mean? She blinked. I'm sorry? In rural towns, when someone died, their house went quiet, curtains drawn, no movement. A signal of loss. She frowned slightly. I'm not sure I follow. I leaned forward. This isn't that kind of quiet house. Then I stood. No, thank you. Back at the reading room, Ruth raised her eyebrows. So? I handed her a cookie. We're not merging. We're not affiliating. And we're certainly not overlapping. Joyce cackled. Overlap my ass. We laughed. And that laughter, real, full, alive, drowned out every ounce of doubt left in me. The local paper called the next morning. The reporter, a young woman with a nervous voice and a stutter she tried to mask with speed, said she'd heard about our unusual venture from someone at City Hall. She wanted to do a feature. We don't need a feature, I said. There was silence. Then, softly, but maybe the town does. She arrived that Friday. Small frame, oversized coat, spiral notebook clutched like armor. Her name was Kelsey. She was 25, maybe, and smelled faintly of printer ink and peppermint. I don't want to do a puff piece, she said, after I offered her tea. I want to know why you started this. I looked around, at the patched ceiling, the worn chairs, Evelyn and Ruth whispering over a pile of returned books, the muffled laughter from the back table where Eleanor was teaching Harold how to use email. Because I got tired of being erased, I said. She scribbled something, then paused. Do you think it'll last? It was the first honest question she'd asked. I think we'll keep going until someone stops us, I said. And even then, we'll find another way. She stayed for 2 hours, listened, observed, even read a poem aloud when Eleanor nudged her into it. Before she left, she pressed my hand. Thank you, she said, for letting me see. The article came out on a Tuesday. It was titled, The Quiet House Makes Noise in Ashton. Not subtle, but not wrong either. There was a photo. Me, slightly out of focus, holding a stack of books with Joyce laughing in the background. The piece itself was kind, not romanticized, just respectful. It told the truth. By Thursday, people we didn't know were showing up with donations. Board games, old DVDs, knitting supplies. A retired nurse offered to run a basic health workshop. Someone brought folding chairs. Someone else brought cash in an envelope marked for tea and second chances. We added more sign-in sheets, rearranged the furniture. We didn't advertise, didn't need to. They came. Of course, not everyone approved. One morning, I found a note shoved under the door. Neat handwriting, anonymous. You're building something that doesn't belong. If people were meant to have this, the city would have provided it. I showed it to Ruth. She snorted. Tell that to a garden, or a bread recipe. We burned it in the kettle pot, not out of drama, just necessity. Then came the letter, not from the city, from a man named Peter Langley, attorney, executor of the estate of Miriam Addison, a woman none of us knew. It said, Ms. Addison, upon her passing, instructed that a portion of her estate be given to an organization that upheld dignity in aging. Apparently, her niece had seen the article. The check enclosed was small by legal standards, but to us, it was everything. Enough to patch the roof, enough to restock the tea shelf, enough to buy new cushions for the chairs. We framed a photo of Miriam, printed from an obituary Joyce found online, and placed it on the mantel with a note beneath. For Miriam, who believed we mattered. That night, I sat alone in the reading room long after the others had gone. Rain tapped against the windows. The floor creaked like it was settling in. I thought of George. He would have sat beside me with that quiet smile of his, reading some faded mystery novel, feet in wool socks. We did it, love, I whispered. And for the first time in years, I felt him there. Not as memory, but as legacy. Spring came like a slow exhale. Crocuses pushed up beside the walkway, stubborn and soft. The reading room smelled less like dust and more like wood warmed by sunlight. Someone had started leaving wildflowers in a mason jar by the front door. No note. No name. People came in waves now. Not crowds, never that, but steady. Predictable in the most comforting way. There were newcomers every week. A man who used to repair pianos. A woman who once danced ballet until her hips gave out. A boy with a stutter who read aloud anyway, voice breaking but brave. We added a suggestion box. Most of the notes were funny, some insightful. One read simply, more soup, less sorrow. We taped that one to the fridge. One morning, as I was shelving books, the front door creaked open. I didn't turn. Good morning. No answer. I looked up. It was my son. David stood in the doorway like someone unsure if he had the right address. He was wearing a blazer too formal for the weather and holding a bouquet wrapped in cellophane. Mum? He said, voice uncertain. I saw the article. A colleague sent it to me. I stood still. Not cold, not angry, just waiting. I didn't know you were doing all this, he added. You never mentioned. You never asked, I said. That stopped him. He looked around. The shelves, the teacups, the notice board with hand-scrawled events, and Eleanor's crooked handwriting. This is impressive. It's not meant to be. He shifted the bouquet from one hand to the other. I thought maybe we could talk. About everything. Behind me, Ruth coughed politely from the hallway. I glanced at her and nodded. She disappeared, giving us the room. I gestured to the long table. We sat. He talked first. About work. The kids. How busy they'd all been. How hard the pandemic had been on the family. He was nervous. The kind of nervous that comes from not knowing what someone owes you anymore. Then he stopped. I read the part about being erased, he said. Is that how you felt? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out the window, where the wind was rustling the branches of a young maple someone had planted last fall. I felt like wallpaper, I said finally. Pretty sometimes, but mostly something no one notices unless it's peeling. He winced. I'm sorry. I don't need sorry. I need honest. He looked down at his hands. I didn't think you needed anyone. You always seemed so capable. Yes. That doesn't mean I stopped needing love. He didn't answer, but his eyes said he heard me. When he left, he didn't ask for anything, didn't offer money either, which was a blessing. He hugged me before he went, not out of obligation, just tightly enough for me to believe it. The flowers he brought sat awkwardly on the counter until Joyce arrived and repurposed them into 3 centerpieces for the tea tables. No one asked where they came from, but they brightened the room all the same. That night, Eleanor brought out a bottle of cider she'd been saving. We sat in mismatched chairs with our feet up on footstools, sipping slowly, the windows open to let in the smell of thawing soil. You ever think about how many lives this place has touched? She asked. Not really, I said. I just try to keep the lights on. You did more than that, she said, tapping her glass against mine. You lit the match. I didn't have anything clever to say, just a warmth in my chest that wasn't from the drink. Outside, the sky turned lavender. Inside, everything glowed. We didn't advertise the workshops. They started the same way everything did. Someone said, "You know, I used to," and someone else said, "I wish I knew how." And before we knew it, there were schedules tacked up by the teapot. Tuesdays became memoir circles. Fridays were tech for the terrified. On Sunday afternoons, Ruth led a class she called Posture and Pride, half stretching, half storytelling. Everyone left straighter and louder. One afternoon, a retired accountant named Glenn showed up with a stack of old legal pads. "You still need someone to do books?" he asked. "I've got arthritis, not amnesia." I handed him the ledger. He returned it 2 days later with color-coded tabs and a spreadsheet that made me want to cry with gratitude. "You're under-reporting donations," he said. "A good problem to have." The name Quiet House started showing up in places we hadn't put it. A mention in a city council meeting where someone cited us as evidence that senior engagement requires autonomy, not oversight. A social media post shared by a local high school student describing our chess club as the realest vibes in town. Someone even added us to Google Maps. The tag read, "Where time slows down in a good way." We were amused, a little wary, but mostly, we were ready. Then came the call. It was from the Belridge Foundation. A woman named Carla, brisk but warm, introduced herself as the Director of Small Grants. "Someone nominated you for our Community Resilience Award," she said. "Someone who?" They asked to remain anonymous. That narrowed it down to everyone who had ever walked through our doors. Carla explained the details. No strings attached, a modest grant, public recognition. They wanted to film a short piece. Interview staff. Showcase what dignity in aging can look like. I said we'd discuss it. Then I sat for a long time with the phone in my lap, wondering how far you can build something before it stops being yours. That evening, I told the others. Evelyn clapped. Harold groaned. Ruth asked how much the grant was. Eleanor just said, "Are they going to make us smile at the camera?" We voted. Unanimous yes. Not for the publicity, not even for the money, but for the message. The film crew came on a Wednesday. 2 women and a sound guy with more tattoos than equipment. They were kind, discreet, interested in everything. They filmed the mural Joyce's granddaughter had painted in the back hallway. A woman reading under a tree, surrounded by little bursts of light. They filmed Evelyn leading a poetry discussion, and Ruth showing someone how to send their first email. They asked me to speak last. "What do you want people to know?" the young director asked, holding her lens steady. I looked into the camera, then past it. "That getting older doesn't mean disappearing," I said. "And that love isn't loud. Sometimes it just makes tea and remembers your name. The video went modestly viral, enough to bring in more visitors, enough to bring flowers. A few reporters called. One university offered to study us. We declined that last one. We didn't want to be dissected. We wanted to be lived. One morning, Glenn waved me over to the desk. Look at this. It was a donation. Anonymous again. $10,000. No note, no conditions. Just a wire transfer and a line that read, "For whatever keeps the lights on." We stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I exhaled. Well, I said. Looks like someone believes in us. Joyce, passing by with a tray of scones, said, Took them long enough. It was a Thursday, humid and slow. The kind of day that made paper curl at the edges and skin stick to the vinyl chairs. We'd planned a quiet afternoon. No classes, just drop-in hours and air-conditioned silence. The door opened just after 2. I was near the front, sorting returns. I looked up and saw him. Michael Denton, director of Ashton Public Libraries. He hadn't aged much, still lean, still crisp. Same thin tie, same tightly combed hair, as if even his follicles feared disobedience. He didn't recognize me at first. I let him wander, past the reading table, past Eleanor helping someone navigate a Kindle, past Joyce pouring lemonade for a group of volunteers. He looked like a man who'd walked into the wrong memory. Then he saw me. His face flickered. Not surprise exactly. Something tighter. Recognition laced with discomfort. "Ms. Harper," he said. Not a question. "Mr. Denton?" I replied. He cleared his throat. I didn't expect, well, this. This? I asked, still shelving. This operation. I read about the foundation grant, the film. I didn't connect the name until today. I suppose it never occurred to you that the person you forced into early retirement might still be alive, I said, calmly, quietly. He flushed. That wasn't personal. Of course not. It never is. He glanced around. This place, it's charming. Charming. That old word. The one they used for anything they didn't respect but couldn't quite dismiss. It's real, I said. He shifted. The city is considering new community outreach models. I've been tasked with assessing potential partnerships. Is that what this is? I asked. Assessment? He looked uneasy now. Not entirely. I also wanted to see it myself. People are talking. The quiet house is becoming visible. I folded my hands. And that bothers you? He hesitated. It complicates things. I walked him to the long table near the front, invited him to sit. Evelyn passed behind us, dropping a small plate of cookies without a word. He reached for one. You've built something impressive. I didn't build it to be impressive. Still, he said, there's potential for collaboration, shared programming, lending resources. Control, you mean? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I appreciate the visit, I said, standing, but we don't need your shelves. We've got our own. He rose slowly. You know, Margaret. Ms. Harper, I corrected. He paused. Of course, Ms. Harper. I never meant to suggest you didn't have more to offer, but institutions change. They do, I agreed, and some of us change without permission. He left without another word. I watched him walk down the sidewalk, arms stiff at his sides, like the world no longer bent the way he was used to. Joyce came up beside me. That who I think it was? Yes. She stared after him. He didn't look as tall as I remembered. No, I said. That happens when you stop looking up. Later that night, I stayed after everyone left. I walked the reading room, turning off lamps one by one. In the silence, I replayed every word of that conversation, not out of regret, out of gratitude. He'd come to measure our worth, and left unable to define it. It was Ruth who found the notice, folded inside the morning paper, tucked between ads for discounted tires and city zoning updates. A small column titled Community Development Review, Public Comment Requested. She handed it to me without a word. I read it standing in the kitchen, the smell of tea and toast suddenly too sweet. The city had designated the entire block for potential redevelopment. The language was vague: mixed-use possibilities, enhanced pedestrian access, modern infrastructure alignment. But I'd worked too long in public service to mistake bureaucracy for innocence. At the bottom, in small print, properties not in formal lease agreements may be subject to reassignment. We weren't on a lease. We were on a promise. I called Richard Crane. He read it once and swore softly under his breath. It's not a direct threat. Not yet. But if a developer puts in a bid... I waited. They can revoke your occupancy. And the non-profit? They can't dissolve you, but they can take the building. That night, we held a meeting. No tea, no workshops. Just chairs in a circle and quiet faces, lit by the amber lamps we'd bought from the estate sale last fall. I laid out the facts, the language, the risks. No one panicked. But the stillness in the room grew thick. Ruth finally spoke. We knew something like this could happen. Evelyn nodded, but I didn't think it would feel like this. Joyce stared at the floor. What do we do? We fight, I said. It came out without thinking. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. We show them this isn't just a building. It's a body. It breathes. And we're its lungs. Within 3 days, the petition had over 200 signatures. We set up a table outside with pens and flyers. People came. They told stories. One man stood in the rain to sign his name, shaking as he wrote. This place made me remember who I was, he whispered. The paper ran another article. Kelsey again. Headline: The Quiet House Faces Loud Uncertainty. It was fair, clear-eyed. She quoted a retired teacher, a single mother, a boy who came every Saturday to play chess with Eleanor. No hysteria, just voices, human ones. Then came the emails, not from the city, from strangers. Some were kind, others curious, but a few were sharp enough to cut. Why do old people need a private clubhouse? This could be housing or shops. Just because something is nice doesn't mean it should stay. We printed those too, pinned them on the bulletin board under the sign that read, Words Matter. Then, underneath in bold, So do we. One evening, Eleanor stayed late. We sat at the long table with our tea, watching the door like it might blink. If they take it, she asked, what do we become? I thought of the shelves, the couches, the echo of shoes on wood. Nothing they can bulldoze, I said. She smiled. Good answer. I shook my head. It's not an answer. It's a beginning. That night, I wrote a letter, not to the city, not to the paper, to the people, to everyone who had ever sat in our chairs, poured from our kettle, left a poem on the notice board. I wrote, You built this, with your quiet, with your kindness, with your refusal to vanish, and whatever comes next, we'll face it standing, together. I taped it to the front door. By morning, it was covered in signatures. The hearing was scheduled for a Monday, room 2B, City Annex, 10 a.m. sharp. They said we didn't need to come in person, that public comments could be submitted online. But that's not how presence works, not the kind that matters. We arrived in coats and scarves, arms linked, breath visible in the morning cold. Harold brought a thermos of coffee. Joyce wore her best brooch, the one shaped like a book. Even Eleanor showed up with her cane and her quiet fury. There were more of us than seats. Inside, the room was too warm. Rows of chairs, a dais with microphones, the city logo printed on folding placards. Officials with tired faces, eyes already skimming agenda items. They didn't expect us. I watched their posture shift when we sat down, like they'd heard thunder, but only smelled rain. They called us near the end. "The Quiet House Collective," the clerk read. "Representative Margaret Harper." I stood. My knees didn't shake. The microphone was low. I didn't bend. "I'm not here to plead," I began. "And I'm not here to explain what we've built. You already know. It's in the papers, the petitions, your inboxes." I looked up, past the board members, into the fluorescent silence. "I'm here to remind you that value isn't measured in tax revenue or square footage. Sometimes it's measured in the way a room holds you without asking who you used to be." I let that sit. Then, "If you take the building, you don't end the Quiet House. You just tell the city that dignity has no address." When I finished, the room was still, not clapping, but listening. That's rarer. We didn't hear back for 10 days. Long days, full of speculation, tea, restlessness. We talked about contingency plans, rented spaces, outdoor tents, home rotations. But no one packed a box. No one loosened a nail. We waited as people who've already survived worse. The letter came on a Thursday. Thin envelope, single sheet. The city of Ashton has reviewed public commentary and reconsidered its redevelopment plan. The building at 118 Main Street will be granted historical use protection under Municipal Code 4.3b. Lease documents to follow. I read it 3 times. Then I walked to the center of the reading room, and I wept. Not loudly, just enough for Evelyn to come over, place a hand on my shoulder, and whisper, "You kept us here." "No," I said. "We did that together." We never celebrated with a party. That wasn't our way. But people brought things. A new kettle, a hand-knit banner, a framed drawing of the building with a bird flying overhead. No labels, just wings. We hung it by the door. Now, months later, the days are slower again. The noise has faded, but the space hasn't. Every chair carries a story. Every shelf, a handprint. We added a small plaque near the front. This place is not a miracle. It's what happens when people refuse to disappear. Sometimes I sit alone in the morning before anyone arrives. I boil water, turn the key, open the blinds, and I say aloud, to the air and the dust and the waiting silence, "I'm still here." Not as a whisper, as a fact.